The sound was impossible. It shouldn't have existed. Not in this house. Not from these children. Not according to 7 specialists, 4 therapists, and 2 years of medical certainty that had calcified into absolute truth. But Meredith Sullivan heard it anyway. Ma, ma. The syllable hung in the air of the nursery like a breath held too long, fragile as spun glass, trembling with effort, undeniably real. Meredith froze on her knees, yellow cleaning gloves still damp from scrubbing the baseboards. Her hands hovered above the hardwood floor, palms down, fingers spread. Any sudden movement might shatter this moment, turn it back into silence. The twin boys sat propped in their specialized medical cribs, heads supported by therapeutic foam cushions designed to prevent pressure sores. Their small bodies remained motionless from the waist down, legs thin and atrophied beneath soft blankets. But their eyes tracked her face with an intensity that made something crack open in her chest. Declan's lips moved again, his mouth forming the shape slowly, deliberately, as if pushing the sound through water. Mama. Rowan echoed him a heartbeat later, the sound softer but unmistakable, carrying the same impossible weight. Mama. Not a reflex, not a random vocalization, not the meaningless sounds the neurologists had predicted they might eventually make. A word, chosen, directed, meant for her. Meredith's vision blurred. The late afternoon light streaming through the nursery windows seemed to brighten and dim simultaneously. She had been hired 3 weeks ago to clean this mansion, to dust the crown molding and vacuum the Persian rugs and pretend not to notice the grief that had soaked into every wall like smoke damage. She was supposed to be invisible, background. Just another piece of staff rotating through a household that had already burned through 8 nannies in 18 months. But these boys, these beautiful, broken, impossible boys, were calling her mama. She leaned closer, her voice barely above a whisper. Yes, sweetheart. I'm right here. I'm listening. Declan's right hand twitched, just slightly, his fingers curling inward, as if reaching for something he couldn't quite grasp, couldn't quite remember how to hold. Behind her in the doorway, she hadn't heard open, stood Nathaniel Ashford. He hadn't made a sound, hadn't crossed the threshold. He simply stood there in his charcoal suit briefcase, still gripped in one hand, the other pressed against the doorframe as if he needed it to stay upright. His tie was loosened. His dark hair, touched with premature grey at the temples, was disheveled from running his hands through it. The kind of tell that came from a man who had spent the drive home bracing himself for another evening of clinical silence. His face had gone the color of old paper. Meredith didn't turn around. She stayed perfectly still, kneeling present. She knew he was there, could feel the weight of his stare like physical pressure against her back. The shock radiating from him in waves she could almost taste. Nathaniel's grip tightened on the leather briefcase handle. The expensive material creaked under the pressure. The sound obscenely loud in the charged quiet. Everything he thought he knew about his sons was unraveling right there on that polished floor. About what was possible. About what could or couldn't heal. About the permanent nature of their condition that 7 different specialists had confirmed with the kind of certainty that left no room for hope. And he hadn't even stepped inside the room yet. His chest rose and fell too quickly. Shallow breaths of a man whose entire reality had just shifted beneath his feet without warning. The boys didn't look at him. Their eyes remained locked on Meredith's face, waiting, trusting. Nathaniel took one step back, then another, moving like a man retreating from the edge of something vast and terrifying. The hallway behind him stretched long and empty, filled with the kind of silence that had defined this house for 2 years. He turned and walked away. The Ashford estate sprawled across 12 acres of meticulously maintained Connecticut landscape, all weathered stone walls and wrought iron gates, and the kind of old money that didn't need to announce itself. Century-old oak trees lined the curved driveway. Formal gardens stretched behind the main house, geometric and precise. Even in November, with most of the flowers gone dormant, everything looked carefully tended. Expensive. Meredith guided her decade-old Honda Civic through the service entrance, past the landscaper's truck and a catering van. Her hands remained steady on the steering wheel, but her heart hammered against her ribs hard enough that she wondered if she might be sick. She had been planning this for 6 months. The job posting had appeared on a domestic staffing website in early October. Housekeeper needed for private estate. Experience preferred. Discretion essential. References required. The salary listed was generous. Too generous for simple cleaning work. Meredith had submitted her application within an hour of seeing it. Not because she needed the money, though the pay would help. Not because housekeeping was her passion. She had applied because of a promise. A promise made to her mother, Kathleen Sullivan, in a hospice room that had smelled like industrial cleaner trying unsuccessfully to mask the scent of approaching death. Kathleen's hand had been cold and papery in hers, her breathing shallow and labored, her voice reduced to something that barely qualified as a whisper. "Promise me, Mary. Promise you'll watch over Vivian's boys." Meredith had promised, and now 6 months after burying her mother in the same cemetery where Vivian Ashford rested, she was here. The mansion loomed ahead like something from another era. 3 stories of grey stone, tall windows that caught the weak November sunlight, classical columns framing the main entrance. It looked more like a museum than a home, cold, imposing, the kind of place where laughter would echo wrong. She parked near the staff entrance and killed the engine. For a long moment, she just sat there staring at the house, her hands still gripping the wheel. Somewhere inside were Declan and Rowan Ashford, 2-year-old identical twins, born 6 weeks premature after their mother's car was struck by a semi-truck running a red light. Vivian had died on impact. The boys had survived, but the trauma had caused severe complications. Nerve damage, paralysis from the waist down, non-verbal. The medical reports used phrases like profound disability and minimal cognitive function and unlikely to ever achieve independence. Meredith's younger brother had received similar diagnoses 12 years ago when she was 19 and he was only 3. She remembered what it felt like to hear those words. The way hope didn't die all at once, but bled out slowly, one specialist appointment at a time. The way people started speaking in hushed tones around you, as if the child were already a ghost. The way even doctors stopped making eye contact when they delivered updates. But she also remembered something else. She remembered that her brother had understood more than anyone gave him credit for. That his eyes would track voices even when his body couldn't respond. That he was locked inside, not absent. And she remembered holding him when he died at 4 years old and knowing in her bones that if someone had just believed harder, fought longer, refused to accept the impossible, maybe. Meredith grabbed her purse and stepped out of the car. The head housekeeper, Mrs. Eleanor Pemberton, met her at the door. Early 60s, silver hair pulled into a severe bun, crisp black dress. The kind of woman whose posture alone communicated that she had worked in great houses all her life and took the position seriously. "Miss Sullivan, you're punctual." "Yes, ma'am." Mrs. Pemberton's shrewd gaze traveled over her, assessing. Meredith had dressed carefully. Simple navy sheath dress, sensible flats, minimal makeup, hair pulled back, nothing flashy. Nothing that would draw attention or suggest she was anything other than what the paperwork claimed, a professional domestic worker. "You're younger than I expected." "I'm 31, ma'am. Most of our staff are older, more established." There was a question buried in the statement. "I have excellent references." Meredith kept her voice even. "Professional." Mrs. Pemberton waved a dismissive hand. "Your references are impeccable. Former employers speak very highly of your work. I'm simply surprised someone with your qualifications would want this particular position. The salary is competitive. The salary is generous because the work is difficult." Mrs. Pemberton's expression softened fractionally. "You're aware of the household situation. I know Mr. Ashford is a widower, that there are children with special needs. The boys," Mrs. Pemberton's voice dropped slightly. Declan and Rowan, it's heartbreaking truly. Most of our previous staff found it too emotionally taxing. We've had 8 nannies in the past 18 months. None lasted more than 6 weeks. I'm not here to be a nanny. No, you're here to clean, but you'll see them, hear them. A pause. It's difficult not to feel things. Meredith met her eyes directly. I can handle it. Mrs. Pemberton studied her for another long moment, then nodded once. Very well. Let me show you the house. The interior matched the exterior. High ceilings, marble floors, furniture that belonged in auction catalogs. A grand staircase swept upward from the entrance hall, its banister polished to a mirror shine. Oil paintings in ornate frames lined the walls. Everything pristine, everything perfect, everything silent. No toys scattered on floors. No children's laughter. No sound of life being lived messily and joyfully. Mrs. Pemberton led her through room after room, explaining the cleaning schedule, the supply closets, Mr. Ashford's preferences for how things should be maintained, the formal dining room that seated 20 but was never used, the library with its floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, the sitting room with furniture that looked like it had never been sat on. Mr. Ashford works long hours, Mrs. Pemberton explained as they climbed the main staircase. He is CEO of Ashford Pharmaceuticals. You'll likely see him rarely. He prefers privacy and appreciates staff who respect that. Of course, they reached the second floor landing. A portrait hung on the wall and Meredith's steps faltered. The woman in the painting was breathtaking. Dark hair cascading over bare shoulders. Green eyes that seemed to hold light. A smile that transformed her entire face into something luminous. She wore a simple cream dress and held one hand against her obviously pregnant belly, protective and proud. That's Mrs. Ashford, Mrs. Pemberton said quietly. Vivian, painted when she was 6 months along with the twins. She commissioned it as a surprise for Nathaniel. It was delivered 3 weeks after she died. Meredith's throat constricted. She had known Vivian. Not well, they had only met a handful of times, but enough. Vivian had been her mother's closest friend. They had connected at the grief support group after both lost infants to rare genetic conditions. Had bonded over the specific hell of loving a child the world had already written off. When Kathleen's own daughter Meredith was born, healthy years later, Vivian had been at the hospital with an enormous bouquet and tears of joy. And when Vivian became pregnant again, terrified after her first loss, Kathleen had talked her through every anxious week. The portrait captured something essential about Vivian. That fierce protective love. That refusal to let fear win. She was beloved, Mrs. Pemberton continued. The accident, it destroyed Nathaniel. He hasn't been the same since. Meredith pulled her gaze from the portrait. I can imagine. They continued down the hallway, the east wing, where the boys were kept. Mrs. Pemberton stopped outside a closed door. This is the nursery. Their nurse Gwendolyn Hayes manages their care. She's very protective of her domain. You're not to interfere with their routine or medical protocols. Understood. I mean it, Miss Sullivan. Gwendolyn has been with the boys since birth. She knows their needs intimately. Previous staff got into trouble by overstepping, by thinking they knew better. Her expression was kind but firm. These children are not yours to save. The words hit harder than intended. Meredith kept her face neutral. I'm here to clean, Mrs. Pemberton, nothing more. The older woman searched her face, then nodded. Good. Let me show you the rest of the floor. But as they walked away, Meredith heard it. Through the closed nursery door, faint but unmistakable. Crying. Not the robust wail of a healthy toddler throwing a tantrum. This was different, hopeless. The sound of a child who had learned that crying brought no comfort but couldn't stop anyway. Her hands clenched. Mrs. Pemberton noticed. As I said, difficult. They continued the tour, but Meredith barely registered the rest. Her mind stayed fixed on that sound. She started work the next morning at 7. The formal wing first. Dusting, vacuuming, polishing silver that would probably never be used. The work was mindless, which suited her. It gave her time to think, to observe, to plan. She needed to be careful. She was here under what could generously be called false pretenses. She did need the job, but her real purpose would raise questions she couldn't answer, not yet. At 9 o'clock, she heard footsteps on the stairs. A woman appeared in the hallway, late 50s, trim and efficient in navy scrubs, steel gray hair pulled back in a no-nonsense ponytail, sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. Gwendolyn Hayes. You must be the new housekeeper. Not a question, an assessment. Meredith straightened from the baseboard she'd been dusting. Yes, ma'am. Meredith Sullivan. Gwendolyn's gaze raked over her with clinical precision. I'm Gwendolyn Hayes. I manage the boys' medical care. We'll stay out of your way if you stay out of ours. Absolutely. Good. A pause. Fair warning. The children can be loud, crying, sometimes screaming during procedures. If you need to take breaks, that's acceptable. Meredith kept her expression carefully neutral. Thank you for letting me know. Gwendolyn's eyes narrowed slightly as if trying to read something in Meredith's tone. Then she nodded once and disappeared back upstairs. Meredith returned to her work, but her hands moved on autopilot. She could hear them now. The boys. One of them crying again. That same hopeless sound from yesterday. Her chest ached with the effort of staying still, of not running upstairs, of not demanding to see them, to hold them, to tell them. Someone saw them as more than broken things to be maintained, but she couldn't, not yet. Patience, strategy, she needed both. She went back to dusting. 3 days passed in careful observation. Meredith learned the household rhythms. Mrs. Pemberton ran the domestic staff with quiet efficiency. The cook, the gardener, the part-time driver all operated on precise schedules that never overlapped unnecessarily. Gwendolyn kept the boys on an even more rigid routine. Medications at 8 noon, 4 and 8, feedings at 9, 1 and 6, physical therapy sessions at 10 and 3 though. Meredith never saw any therapist arrive. Equipment checks, vitals monitoring, everything documented with medical precision. And through it all, the crying. Not constant, but regular enough that Meredith started to map it. The boys were quietest in the mornings, most distressed in the late afternoons. One twin, she couldn't tell which, seemed to cry more than the other. She also learned that Nathaniel Ashford was a ghost in his own home. She saw him exactly twice in 3 days, both times from a distance. Tall, broad-shouldered, moving through the house like he was afraid to disturb anything. He left before 7 each morning, returned after 9 at night, never went upstairs to the nursery. On the 4th day, Miss Pemberton assigned her to clean the second-floor hallway. The nursery was at the end, door closed. But as Meredith worked her way down the hall with her cleaning cart, the door opened. Gwendolyn emerged carrying a tray of medical supplies. Oh, the hallway's scheduled for today. Yes, ma'am, I can come back if. No, it's fine, just keep the noise down. The boys are resting. Gwendolyn headed downstairs, leaving the nursery door slightly ajar. Meredith stood frozen for a heartbeat. Then slowly she moved closer. Through the gap in the door she could see inside. 2 medical cribs, larger than standard cribs, equipped with specialized mattresses designed to prevent bed sores. Monitors beeped softly on stands between them. The walls were painted a soft blue. Curtains blocked most of the natural light, and in each crib, a small figure, Declan and Rowan. They were so impossibly tiny. Meredith's vision blurred. Both boys lay on their backs, arms positioned carefully on adaptive cushions. Their legs were thin, clearly yomokukde. They wore soft cotton onesies. Their dark hair, Vivian's coloring, was wispy and fine, but their eyes were open. Declan stared at the ceiling, his gaze unfocused and distant. Rowan's head was turned slightly toward the window, but his eyes tracked nothing. They looked like dolls, beautiful and broken and utterly still. Meredith's hands gripped the doorframe. This was what 2 years of medical intervention looked like. Clean, maintained, alive in the most technical sense, but not living. Footsteps on the stairs. Gwendolyn returning. Meredith jerked back, grabbing her cleaning supplies, and moved quickly down the hall. But the image stayed burned in her mind. Those empty eyes, that stillness. No, they weren't gone. They were trapped. She had seen this before, 12 years ago. Her brother lying in a similar bed and everyone saying there was nothing there, nothing to reach. But she had known different, and she knew different now. The next day, Meredith made her move. Subtle, calculated. Miss Pemberton assigned her to deep clean the nursery wing while Gwendolyn took her afternoon break. Meredith worked slowly, methodically, dusting, organizing. And when she reached the nursery itself, she stepped inside. The boys were awake, positioned identically on their backs, eyes open but unseeing. Medical equipment hummed, monitors displayed steady heartbeats. Meredith crossed to the window and opened the curtains slightly. Not fully. She didn't want to alarm Gwendolyn, but enough to let natural light filter in. Then she began to hum, quietly, an Irish lullaby her mother had sung to her. Simple melody, repetitive, soothing. At first nothing changed. She continued working, dusting the shelves, organizing supplies, humming under her breath. And then she felt it, a shift in the room's energy. She glanced at the cribs. Rowan's eyes had moved, just fractionally, but they were no longer staring at nothing. They were focused on her. Meredith's pulse quickened. She kept humming, kept moving naturally around the room. Rowan's gaze followed her. Deliberate, tracking, not reflex, not coincidence, awareness. She moved to Declan's crib, kept humming. Declan's eyes remained fixed on the ceiling for several long seconds. Then slowly they shifted toward her voice. Meredith's breath caught, but she forced herself to stay calm, to act natural. She reached out carefully and touched Declan's hand where it rested on the cushion. His fingers twitched. She touched Rowan's hand. His fingers curled slightly around hers, not much, barely anything, but voluntary. Purposeful. Meredith's eyes filled with tears she couldn't let fall. "You're in there," she whispered. "Both of you. I see you." Behind her, the door opened. She jerked back, grabbing her dust cloth. Gwendolyn stood in the doorway, eyes narrowed. "What are you doing?" "Dusting the shelves, ma'am. I apologize if I disturbed them." Gwendolyn's gaze moved from Meredith to the boys and back. "The curtains are open." "I'm sorry. I thought natural light might." "The boys are sensitive to overstimulation." Gwendolyn crossed to the window and closed the curtains firmly. "Please stick to cleaning, nothing else." "Yes, ma'am." Gwendolyn checked the monitors with brisk efficiency, then turned back. "You can finish tomorrow. They need their medication." Meredith gathered her supplies and left. But as she stepped into the hallway, she glanced back. Rowan's eyes were still on her, watching, waiting. Over the next 10 days, Meredith established a pattern. She cleaned the nursery hallway every afternoon at 3:30. The same time Gwendolyn took her break, and she hummed different songs each day. Irish lullabies, folk melodies. Nothing complicated, just gentle repetitive tunes. And slowly, impossibly, the boys began to respond. Not dramatically, not in ways anyone else would notice, but Meredith noticed. The way Declan's breathing would slow and deepen when she sang, the way Rowan's head would turn fractionally toward her voice, the way both boys' eyes would track her movement when she passed the open doorway. Small things, subtle shifts, but real. She started documenting in a small notebook, nothing official, just observations. Day 6, Declan maintained eye contact for 8 seconds. Day 8, Rowan's fingers curled when I touched his palm. Day 10, both boys seem calmer when I'm present. Heart rates normalize. Gwendolyn noticed the boys' improved demeanor, but attributed it to medication adjustments. Mrs. Pemberton commented that Meredith was doing excellent work, and Nathaniel Ashford remained a ghost, there but not present. Until the evening, everything changed. It was a Tuesday. 3 weeks after Meredith started, She was scheduled to leave at 6 but had stayed late to finish the upstairs hallway. Gwendolyn had gone home. The evening nurse wouldn't arrive until 8. Meredith was alone with the boys. She stood in the nursery doorway, supplies in hand, and made a decision. She stepped inside, set down her cleaning cart, and crossed to the bookshelf that lined one wall. She had noticed it days ago. Children's books, all pristine and unopened. Decorative, performative, but tucked behind them, she had glimpsed something else. Meredith moved books aside carefully and found it, a leather-bound notebook, worn at the edges, floral pattern embossed on the cover. Her hands trembled as she lifted it out, opened it. The handwriting inside was elegant, flowing, unmistakably feminine. The first page read, "For my darling boys, for when I'm not there." Vivian's journal. Meredith's chest constricted. She flipped through pages, recipes, poems, letters to the boys written before they were born, hopes and dreams and fears laid bare in blue ink, and near the middle a lullaby. Music notes sketched out in careful detail, lyrics written below. "Sleep, my darlings, sleep so sound. Mama's love is all around. When the stars come out to play, I'll keep the darkness far away." At the bottom of the page, a single line in smaller script. "If anything should happen to me, I pray someone with a mother's heart finds them. Kathleen, if you're reading this, you'll know what to do. Tell your daughter I believe in her." The notebook slipped from Meredith's hands. She caught it before it hit the floor, but her whole body had gone cold. Vivian had somehow known that Kathleen's daughter might be the one to find this, to help, as if she had seen the future and left breadcrumbs. Meredith looked at the boys. They were both awake, watching her with those dark eyes that saw more than anyone believed. "Your mama wrote this for you," she whispered. "She loved you so much, and she sent me here. I don't know how, but she did." She sat down cross-legged on the floor between the cribs, opened the notebook to the lullaby, and began to sing, softly at first, testing the melody, finding the rhythm. "Sleep, my darlings, sleep so sound." The effect was immediate. Both boys turned their heads toward her, eyes wide, suddenly alert in a way she had never seen. Declan's mouth opened slightly. Rowan's breathing quickened. Meredith continued singing, her voice gaining confidence. "Mama's love is all around." Declan made a sound, not a cry, not a whimper, a deliberate vocalization. Meredith's voice faltered. She leaned closer. "Yes. What is it, sweetheart?" Declan's lips moved, struggling, forming. "Ma?" Rowan echoed him, the sound breathy and uncertain. "Ma?" Tears streamed down Meredith's face. She reached for them, hands shaking. Declan tried again, his whole face scrunching with the effort. "Mama." Rowan followed clearer this time. "Mama." "Yes," Meredith sobbed. "Yes, I'm here. I'm right here." She didn't hear the footsteps in the hallway, didn't hear the door open wider, didn't know Nathaniel Ashford was standing there frozen in shock until she heard his briefcase hit the floor with a sound like thunder. Meredith turned. Their eyes met. His face had drained of all color. His hand gripped the doorframe hard enough that his knuckles showed white. He looked like a man who had just watched the dead rise. His voice broke, died. He tried again. They spoke. Meredith nodded, unable to find words through the tears. Nathaniel took one step into the room, then another, moving like he was afraid the spell would break. He stared at his son, at Meredith, at the impossible scene unfolding. "They called you Mama?" Not a question, something between an accusation and a plea. I wasn't trying to." "How?" The word came out raw. 7 specialists said they would never speak. Never. "How did you?" "I didn't do anything." Meredith's voice steadied. "They did. I believed they could." Nathaniel's jaw clenched. His eyes moved to the notebook in her lap. "What is that?" It was Vivian's. I found it behind the books. She left it for them. Let me see it. Meredith stood close to him and placed the journal in his hands. Nathaniel opened it with trembling fingers, saw his wife's handwriting, read the dedication, flipped to the lullaby, and saw the line about Kathleen's daughter. His head snapped up. Kathleen! Kathleen Sullivan! My mother! Recognition crashed across his features. Vivian's friend from the support group. Yes, she died. After Vivian. 6 months later, Nathaniel's eyes searched her face. And you're her daughter. Yes, so you came here. He couldn't finish the sentence. My mother made me promise. Before she died, she asked me to watch over your boys, to make sure they were okay. The silence stretched between them, thick with implications. Then, Nathaniel's legs seemed to give out. He sank into the rocking chair beside Declan's crib, still clutching the notebook. Your mother was a good woman, he said quietly. Vivian loved her, trusted her completely. I know. And she sent you here, to help, to try. Nathaniel looked at his sons, really looked at them, perhaps for the first time in 2 years. Declan's eyes were heavy, now exhausted from the effort of speaking, but they were open, and they looked back at his father. Nathaniel's breath hitched. Declan. The boy blinked, slow, deliberate. Nathaniel's face crumpled. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I left you. He reached out a hand, hesitated, then touched his son's cheek. I'm here now. I promise I'm here now. Meredith turned away, giving them privacy. But Nathaniel's voice stopped her. Wait. She turned back. He was looking at her with eyes that held grief and wonder and desperate hope. Teach me, he said. Whatever you're doing, however you reach them, teach me. Mr. Ashford, Nathaniel, please. His voice broke again. I've been so afraid, afraid to try, afraid to fail, afraid to hope, but you're not afraid. I'm terrified every single day. But you do it anyway. Yes, then help me. He stood crossing to her. Help me be the father they deserve. I'm begging you. Meredith looked into his face, saw the same desperation she had felt 12 years ago when her brother was dying and no one would listen. She extended her hand. We'll do it together. His hand closed around hers, warm, strong, shaking. Thank you. And for the first time since she had entered this house, the air didn't feel quite so heavy. The transformation didn't happen overnight, but it started that evening in small, deliberate ways. Nathaniel called his office, cleared his schedule for the next day. He sat on the nursery floor with Meredith and learned the songs from Vivian's notebook. He read to the boys from books that had never been opened. His voice was uncertain at first, stilted, like he'd forgotten how to be gentle. But Meredith coached him. Lower, softer. They need to feel safe with your voice. And he learned. They read Goodnight Moon 3 times that night because Declan's eyes would track the illustrations. They sang lullabies because Rowan's breathing would slow and deepen. And when Gwendolyn arrived at 8 for the evening shift, she found employer and housekeeper sitting together on the floor. Both boys more alert than she'd seen them in months. What happened? She demanded. Nathaniel stood. They spoke. That's impossible. I heard them. Meredith heard them. It happened. Gwendolyn's face hardened. Mr. Ashford, with all respect, the boys sometimes make sounds. Random vocalizations. It doesn't mean it wasn't random. They said mama, clearly, deliberately. To whom? To her. He gestured at Meredith. Gwendolyn's expression shifted. Something cold entered her eyes. I see. This is good news, Gwendolyn. They're responsive. We need to document this. Call Dr. Whitmore. I'll make a note in their chart. Her tone was clipped. But I wouldn't get your hopes up. False hope can be more damaging than acceptance. She moved to the cribs, checking vitals with brisk efficiency. Nathaniel opened his mouth to argue, but Meredith touched his arm gently. It's late, she said quietly. The boys need rest. He nodded reluctantly. Tomorrow then. We'll show her tomorrow. They left Gwendolyn to her work. In the hallway, Nathaniel turned to Meredith. Thank you for everything, for being here, for refusing to give up on them. They're worth fighting for. I know that now. He paused. I should have known it all along. Grief does strange things to people. It does, but I'm done running. His jaw set with determination. Whatever it takes, I'm going to be the father they need. Meredith believed him. The next 3 weeks brought changes that rippled through the household like stones dropped in still water. Nathaniel restructured his work schedule. He arrived at the office at 10 instead of 7, left at 4 instead of 9, made it home for the boys' evening routine. He joined Meredith in the nursery every morning, sat on the floor and talked to his sons, read to them, sang to them, learned their cues. The boys responded. Declan started making more sounds. Not words yet, but deliberate vocalizations, different pitches, attempting to communicate. Rowan's eye tracking became more pronounced. He would follow faces across the room. Focus on objects. Both boys showed clear recognition when Nathaniel or Meredith entered. Meredith documented everything in Vivian's journal. She had started adding her own entries beside the elegant script. Week 3. Declan held eye contact with Nathaniel for 15 seconds during story time. Week 4, Rowan smiled. Not gas, not reflex. An actual smile when Meredith made a funny face. Week 5. Both boys vocalized when Nathaniel left the room, as if calling him back. The journal had become a bridge between the woman who had loved these boys first and the woman who loved them now. Gwendolyn watched the changes with increasing tension. She documented the boys' responses in her medical charts, but her notes emphasized reflexes and coincidence. She added more sedatives to their medication schedule. For their comfort, she explained. But Meredith noticed something. The boys were more lethargic after Gwendolyn's shifts, more withdrawn, and they only seemed to truly wake up when she was gone. One evening, Meredith stayed late. Gwendolyn had left at 6. The evening nurse was running late. Meredith was alone with the boys. She pulled out her phone and set it to record video. Then she sang, and the boys responded immediately. Declan vocalized, "Ah, Rowan's eyes tracked her face, bright, alert. Both of them engaged in ways they never were during Gwendolyn's shifts. Meredith saved the video. Evidence, because something was wrong, and she was going to find out what. The answer came sooner than expected. It arrived in the form of a phone call. Meredith was in her small studio apartment. She hadn't moved into the mansion's staff quarters, preferring to maintain some separation when her phone rang at 11 at night. Unknown number. She answered cautiously. "Hello, this is Gwendolyn Hayes." Meredith sat up straight. "Is everything all right, the boys?" "The boys are fine. I need to speak with you in person. Tomorrow morning, 7 a.m. There's a coffee shop on Main Street." "What is this about?" "I'll explain tomorrow. Come alone." The line went dead. Meredith stared at her phone. Every instinct screamed warning. But she needed to know. The coffee shop was nearly empty at 7 a.m. Just a handful of early commuters and one tired-looking nurse sitting in a back booth. Gwendolyn looked older than her 58 years. Her face was drawn. Dark circles under her eyes suggested she hadn't slept. Meredith slid into the seat across from her. "Thank you for coming," Gwendolyn said quietly. "What's this about?" Gwendolyn wrapped both hands around her coffee mug, stared into it like she was reading tea leaves. "I need to tell you something, and you're going to hate me for it." Meredith waited. "I've been compromising the boys' care." The words hit like cold water. "What?" "Not deliberately. Not at first." Gwendolyn's voice rushed out now, defensive and desperate. "I was just following conservative protocols, keeping them comfortable, preventing overstimulation. But then what?" Miss Constance Hartwell started calling. Meredith's hands clenched under the table. "Vivian's sister." "Yes, she's concerned about the boys, about Nathaniel's fitness as a father." She started asking detailed questions about their condition, about their progress or lack of it. And Gwendolyn met her eyes. "She offered me money, a lot of money, to provide detailed reports on the boys' condition, reports that emphasize their limitations rather than any improvements." "You've been lying in the medical documentation." I've been selective in my observations. Gwendolyn flinched but didn't deny it. She said it was for their own good, that Nathaniel wasn't capable of caring for them properly, that they deserved a real family environment. And you believed her? At first, yes. Gwendolyn's voice dropped to a whisper. You have to understand. I've been with these boys since birth. I watched Nathaniel spiral into grief, watched him ignore them for months, years. When Constance suggested they might be better off elsewhere, it seemed reasonable. Reasonable to falsify medical records, to emphasize certain aspects over others, to paint a complete picture of their challenges. Meredith leaned forward. Why are you telling me this now? Gwendolyn was quiet for a long moment. Because you changed things. The boys started responding. Nathaniel started showing up. And I realized, her voice broke. I realized I'd been wrong about all of it. So you had a crisis of conscience. I had a daughter. The words came out flat, final. 12 years ago, she had cerebral palsy. The doctor said she'd never walk, never talk, never be independent. I trusted them, accepted it, kept her comfortable. Gwendolyn's eyes filled. She died at 4 years old, and I spent the next 8 years wondering if I'd given up too soon, if I'd fought harder, believed more, refused to accept impossible. The unfinished sentence hung between them. I see that fight in you, Gwendolyn continued, and it terrifies me. 'Cause what if you're right? What if I've been doing to Declan and Rowan what I did to my own daughter, keeping them comfortable while their potential dies? Meredith's anger softened fractionally. What do you want from me? Help me do the right thing. Gwendolyn pulled an envelope from her purse, slid it across the table. This is everything. Copies of the reports I sent to Constance, records of the payments, emails, all of it. Meredith stared at the envelope but didn't touch it. Why give this to me? Because I can't give it to Nathaniel. I'm too ashamed, but you, Gwendolyn's smile was bitter. You actually care about those boys. You'll know what to do with it. What about Dr. Whitmore? He's coming for an evaluation today. Gwendolyn's jaw tightened. He's friends with Constance, medical school classmates. She's already spoken to him. You think he'll falsify his assessment? I think he'll be conservative in his conclusions, like I've been. Meredith's mind raced. What are you going to tell him when he asks about their progress? Gwendolyn met her eyes. I don't know yet. I guess we'll see who I am when the moment comes. She stood abruptly, dropped a 10 on the table. I should go. Dr. Whitmore will be at the house by 9. Gwendolyn, take the envelope, or don't. But whatever you do it for them, not for me. She left without looking back. Meredith sat alone in the booth, staring at the envelope. Inside was proof, evidence of conspiracy to falsify medical records. But it was also a bomb. If she used it, Gwendolyn would be destroyed. The boys would lose their primary caregiver, even if that caregiver had betrayed them. If she didn't use it, Constance would continue building a case on false information. Meredith opened the envelope, read through it. Bank statements showing regular deposits from an account registered to Constance Hartwell. Emails requesting that Gwendolyn focus on the challenges rather than anomalies. Draft reports emphasizing no voluntary movement and minimal cognitive response. All lies. Meredith's hands shook as she tucked the papers back in. She would figure out what to do with this. But first she needed to see what happened with Dr. Whitmore. Dr. Marcus Whitmore arrived at precisely 9 o'clock. Meredith was cleaning the downstairs hallway when he entered with someone she hadn't expected to see. Constance Hartwell. Tall, elegant, dark hair swept into a chignon, green eyes like her sister's but harder, colder. She wore a designer suit and carried herself with the confidence of someone who had never lost an argument. Meredith kept her head down in visible staff, but watched from the corner of her eye. The boys are upstairs, Constance was saying. Gwendolyn is with them. Dr. Whitmore, mid-50s, silver-haired, expensive watch, nodded. And Nathaniel in his office. He doesn't know I'm here. Constance, if you're asking me to. I'm asking you to provide an honest medical assessment. Marcus, nothing more. Her smile was sharp. Though I hope you'll be thorough about documenting their limitations for their own protection. They climbed the stairs. Meredith waited until they were out of sight, then followed quietly. She positioned herself in the linen closet with the door cracked, close enough to hear. Dr. Whitmore's voice drifted from the nursery. Let's begin the assessment. Declan first. Sounds of examination, equipment, the doctor making notes. Then Gwendolyn's voice, stronger than Meredith expected. Before we continue, doctor, I need to make a correction to my previous reports. Silence. Then Constance's voice, sharp with warning. Gwendolyn, I may have overemphasized certain limitations in my documentation. The boys have shown more responsiveness than I initially recorded. What are you talking about? Constance demanded. Your last report was 3 days ago. You said, I know what I said, and it was inaccurate. Dr. Whitmore sounded puzzled. Gwendolyn, if you're feeling uncertain about your assessments, I'm certain I was asked to focus on limitations rather than progress by Miss Hartwell in exchange for financial compensation. The silence that followed was absolute. Then, Constance's voice, low and dangerous. That is a very serious accusation. It's the truth. You're saying I bribed you to falsify medical records. I'm saying you paid me to frame my observations in a particular way, and I should never have agreed. Meredith heard Dr. Whitmore clear his throat. This is highly irregular. Constance, is there any truth to this? Of course not. The woman is clearly having some kind of breakdown. The stress of caring for severely disabled children. I have documentation, Gwendolyn interrupted. Bank statements, emails, all of it. Another silence. Then the sound of heels clicking rapidly. Constance leaving the room. Meredith pressed herself back into the closet as Constance swept past in the hallway, already on her phone. I need my attorney now. The evaluation continued without Constance. Dr. Whitmore worked methodically, and what he found contradicted every report Gwendolyn had filed for the past 18 months. Declan tracked objects with his eyes, turned his head toward sounds, reached toward familiar voices. Rowan demonstrated voluntary movement in his upper body, made deliberate vocalizations, showed clear recognition of faces. When Dr. Whitmore finished, he was silent for a long time. Finally, these boys are not vegetative. No, Gwendolyn agreed quietly. They're not. They're showing significant neuroplasticity. This is more consistent with locked-in syndrome than true paralysis. Yes. How long have you known? I suspected for months, but I was certain after Miss Sullivan started working with them. The housekeeper, she has the gift, or maybe just belief. Either way, the boys respond to her in ways they don't respond to anyone else. But the Whitmore was quiet again. Then, I need to file a corrected assessment immediately. This changes everything. I understand. You realize you could face serious consequences for the false reports. Yes. Why did you do it? Gwendolyn's voice was barely audible. Because I was afraid and greedy and wrong. Meredith heard the doctor gathering his materials. I'll speak with Mr. Ashford directly, and I'll be contacting the state medical board about Miss Hartwell's attempts to influence my evaluation. Thank you, doctor. Footsteps, the doctor leaving, then silence. Meredith waited several minutes before emerging from the closet. She found Gwendolyn sitting in the rocking chair, face in her hands. You did the right thing, Meredith said quietly. Gwendolyn looked up, her eyes were red-rimmed. Did I just ended my career, possibly opened myself up to prosecution. But you told the truth. For what those boys' father will probably fire me anyway once he knows what I did. Maybe, but at least they'll have a fighting chance now. Gwendolyn wiped her eyes. She's going to come after you next, you know, once Constance realizes you're the reason her plan fell apart. Let her try. You're braver than I am. Meredith shook her head. I'm just stubborn. There's a difference. She left Gwendolyn alone with her conscience. Constance filed for emergency custody 72 hours later. The petition arrived via courier on a Thursday morning. 29 pages of legal documentation outlining why Nathaniel Ashford was unfit to care for his sons. Nathaniel read it in his study, Meredith standing beside him. His face went grey. The accusations were brutal and strategic. Emotional neglect, 2 years of documented absence from his sons' lives, abdication of parental responsibility, reliance on rotating staff, failure to provide appropriate medical care, trusting unqualified personnel, and buried in the middle, a new claim that made Meredith's stomach turn. Inappropriate relationship between employer and domestic employee creating unstable environment for minor children. Nathaniel's jaw clenched. She's implying that you and I know. It's not true. I know that too, but a judge might not. Nathaniel flipped to the next page. She's requesting a hearing in 10 days, and she's asking for temporary custody pending the outcome. Can she do that? With the right judge and the right evidence. He didn't finish. Meredith's mind raced. What about Dr. Whitmore's new report? It helps, but she'll argue he was compromised, that Gwendolyn manipulated him. Nathaniel's laugh was bitter. She has 18 months of previous documentation showing no progress. One revised report won't overcome that. But we know that documentation was false, which Gwendolyn admitted to falsifying. That doesn't make us look good either. Meredith sank into a chair. So what do we do? Nathaniel was quiet for a long moment. Then he pulled open his desk drawers and withdrew a document. We do this. He handed it to her. Legal guardianship papers, naming Meredith Sullivan as co-guardian of Declan and Rowan Ashford, with full parental rights in the event of Nathaniel's death or incapacity. Meredith's hands trembled as she read. I can't. This is too much. Probably. But it's the truth. Nathaniel moved to stand beside her. You're more than an employee, Meredith. You're family. You have been since the day they first spoke to you. Constance will destroy me with this. She'll say I manipulated you, that I'm after your money. Then let her say it. I'll stand up in court and tell them exactly who you are and what you've done for my son. Nathaniel, please. His voice cracked. I can't do this alone. I don't want to. You're not replacing Vivian. You're honoring her. This is what she wanted. She said so in her journal. Meredith looked down at the papers, at the space for her signature. If I sign this, there's no going back. I know. Constance will use every weapon she has. I know that too. Are you absolutely certain? Nathaniel knelt beside her chair, took her hands in his. The day you walked into this house, you gave my sons their voices back. You gave me my heart back. You're not just necessary. You're essential. Meredith's eyes filled with tears. She picked up the pen and signed. Constance received notice of the guardianship arrangement within hours. Her response was immediate and vicious. An amended petition filed by end of day. New accusations, new strategies. She wasn't just arguing. Nathaniel was unfit anymore. She was arguing Meredith was predatory, manipulative, a con artist who had exploited a grieving widower and engineered herself into a position of power over vulnerable children. The hearing was moved up to 7 days. Nathaniel hired a lawyer, a good one, Margaret Chen, 43, tough as nails, with a reputation for winning impossible cases. But even she looked concerned when she reviewed Constance's filing. This is a compelling narrative, Margaret admitted in their first meeting. Vulnerable widower, unqualified woman who appears in his life and rapidly escalates her role. It plays into a lot of assumptions. So we fight it, Nathaniel said. We will, but we need evidence, concrete proof of the boy's improvement, third-party verification, something beyond your word and Miss Sullivan's. We have Dr. Whitmore's revised assessment, which Constance will claim was coerced. We need more. Meredith spoke up. What if we film them? Show the judge what they can actually do. Margaret considered. Video evidence could help, but it needs to be verifiable, time-stamped, impossible to fake. I can do that. Then start immediately. We have 6 days. That night, Meredith set up her phone on a small tripod in the nursery. And she began to document, not performances, not staged moments, just truth, Declan reaching for his father's hand during story time, Rowan tracking a toy car across his field of vision, both boys making deliberate sounds when Nathaniel sang to them. She filmed for 6 days straight, built a library of evidence that Constance couldn't dispute, short clips, time-stamped, showing consistent progress. Meanwhile, Nathaniel did something he hadn't done in 2 years. He started recording voice memos to the boys, talking to them about their mother, about the future, about hope. Your mama believed in miracles, he said in one recording, his voice thick with emotion. And she was right, because you two are living proof. Meredith compiled everything, organized it, prepared it for court, but she also made another decision. She still had Gwendolyn's envelope, the proof of Constance's conspiracy. She made copies, sent them to Margaret, and she prepared for war. Because Constance had made a critical mistake, she expected them to defend. But Meredith was going to attack. The night before the hearing, neither of them could sleep. Meredith sat in the nursery, watching the boys breathe. Declan on his side now, Rowan with one small hand curled near his face. They looked peaceful, safe. Tomorrow, that safety would be challenged. Tomorrow, someone would try to take them away. Meredith reached out, gently touching each boy's hand. "I won't let her take you," she whispered. "I promise." The door opened softly. Nathaniel stood there looking as exhausted as she felt. "Can't sleep either?" he asked. "No." He crossed the room, stood beside her. Together they kept vigil. Two people who had both lost everything and had somehow found each other in the wreckage. "Whatever happens tomorrow," Nathaniel began. "We'll win," Meredith interrupted. "We have to. But if we don't, we will." Her certainty seemed to steady him. They stood in comfortable silence, watching over the boys. And Meredith allowed herself one moment of doubt. One quiet question directed at the universe, at Vivian, at her own mother. "Did I do enough?" The answer came not in words, but in feeling. A sense of rightness, of being exactly where she was meant to be. Tomorrow would be a battle, but tonight they were ready. The building smelled like old wood and industrial cleaner and the nervous sweat of people whose lives were being decided by strangers in black robes. Meredith sat in the gallery, hands folded in her lap, spine straight. She wore a simple navy dress, no jewelry except the small silver cross that had belonged to her mother. Hair pulled back, minimal makeup. She looked exactly like what she was, a woman with nothing to hide. Constance Hartwell sat 3 rows ahead, flanked by her attorney. Charcoal suit, perfect posture, the confidence of someone who had never lost anything she truly fought for. But there were cracks in the facade. Meredith could see them now. The way Constance's fingers worried at her wedding ring, the tension in her shoulders, the occasional glance backward as if checking whether Meredith was still there. Good. Let her be nervous. Judge Patricia Morrison entered at precisely 9 o'clock, 63. Steel grey hair pulled into a severe knot, reading glasses on a chain. She had a reputation for being fair, but unforgiving of games. "Be seated." The courtroom settled. Judge Morrison reviewed the case file in silence. The only sound was pages turning, the scratch of her pen making notes. Finally she looked up. "This is a petition for emergency custody of minor children, Declan and Rowan Ashford, currently in the care of their father, Nathaniel Ashford. Ms. Hartwell, you're claiming Mr. Ashford is unfit." Constance's attorney stood, tall, silver-haired, voice like aged whiskey. "Yes, Your Honor. We have substantial evidence of parental neglect, inappropriate delegation of care to unqualified individuals, and an unstable home environment that places these vulnerable children at risk. And Mr. Ashford contests these claims." Margaret stood, younger, less polished, but her eyes were sharp as broken glass. "Vigorously, Your Honor. The claims are not only false, but part of a calculated campaign to obtain custody for financial gain." Judge Morrison's eyebrows lifted. "That's a serious accusation, Counselor." "We have proof, Your Honor." "Then we'll hear it. Miss Hartwell, present your case." What followed was brutal and methodical. Constance's attorney painted a picture of a man who had drowned in grief and left his children to be raised by a rotating staff of strangers. He presented the old medical reports, 18 months of documentation showing no improvement, no voluntary responses, progressive deterioration. He showed Nathaniel's work schedule, the late nights, the business trips, the meetings that took priority over his sons. He called witnesses, a former nanny who testified that Nathaniel had barely acknowledged the children during her 6-week employment, that he seemed uncomfortable around them, that he had treated the nursery like a hospital ward he couldn't bear to enter. It was devastating. And it was true. Meredith watched Nathaniel's face as he listened, saw him age with each word, the weight of his own failures crushing down. But he didn't interrupt, didn't try to deny what couldn't be denied. The attorney continued. He presented photographs of the boys' specialized equipment. The medical-grade cribs, the monitors, the medications. He made it sound like a laboratory rather than a nursery. These children require expert care, he argued. Care that Mr. Ashford has proven unable to provide. He has delegated their welfare to unqualified staff while pursuing his own interests. Then he turned to Meredith. 6 weeks ago, Mr. Ashford hired a housekeeper named Meredith Sullivan. Within 2 weeks, she had inserted herself into the children's care routine. Within 4 weeks, she had obtained legal co-guardianship. This rapid escalation from employee to legal parent suggests a pattern of manipulation and exploitation. He presented a timeline, showed how quickly Meredith had gone from cleaning staff to guardian. Miss Sullivan has no medical training, no credentials in child development, no experience with disabled children. Yet she has been granted equal legal authority over 2 of the most vulnerable children in this state. He painted her as a predator, a con artist who had seen a grieving man and exploited his weakness. These children deserve stability. They deserve a family. Miss Hartwell can provide both. She has 2 healthy children of her own, a stable marriage, a home equipped for their needs, and most importantly, a genuine love for her nephews that predates the tragedy of her sister's death. He sat down. Judge Morrison made notes. Her expression was unreadable. Mr. Ashford's counsel, your response. Margaret stood. Your Honor, we don't dispute that Mr. Ashford went through a period of grief-induced absence. He lost his wife tragically and unexpectedly. He struggled. Any reasonable person would. She gestured to Nathaniel. But the question before this court isn't whether he's been perfect. It's whether he's unfit. And we contend he is not only fit, but actively engaged in his son's care in ways he hasn't been since their birth. His 6 weeks is hardly a pattern, Counselor. No, Your Honor, but it's a beginning. And more crucially, it's effective. The children are responding. They're making progress that multiple specialists declared impossible. According to whom? According to Dr. Marcus Whitmore, a board-certified pediatric neurologist with 30 years of experience. His most recent evaluation conducted 1 week ago documents significant improvement in cognitive function, voluntary movement, and communication attempts. Margaret handed copies to the clerk. Judge Morrison reviewed the document, frowning. This contradicts his previous assessments. Yes, Your Honor, because his previous assessments were based on falsified information provided by the children's nurse, who was being paid by Miss Hartwell to downplay any improvements. The courtroom erupted. Judge Morrison's gavel cracked like thunder. Order, I will have order. Silence fell. The judge turned to Constance. Miss Hartwell, did you pay the children's nurse to provide false medical information? Constance stood slowly. Her composure was cracking. Your Honor, I provided financial support to a healthcare worker who was struggling financially. Any influence on her reporting was unintentional. Unintentional. The judge's tone was flat as glass. You accidentally paid her to lie about your nephew's condition. I wanted accurate information. If my questions guided her observations towards certain aspects of their care, there was thoroughness, not manipulation. Do you have documentation of these questions? Constance hesitated. Much of our communication was verbal. How convenient. Margaret seized the moment. Your Honor, we have bank statements showing regular payments totaling over $40,000. Email correspondence requesting that the nurse focus on limitations rather than anomalies, and a sworn affidavit from the nurse herself admitting to falsifying documentation at Ms. Hartwell's explicit request. She presented the evidence. Gwendolyn's envelope, everything laid bare. Judge Morrison reviewed it in silence. Her expression grew colder with each page. "This is deeply troubling," she said finally. "Miss Hartwell, these accusations, if proven, constitute fraud and obstruction. Do you understand that? Your Honor, I only wanted what was best. That's not what I asked." Constance's attorney stood. "Your Honor, my client's motivations are relevant, extremely relevant." The judge's voice cut like a scalpel. "Because motivation determines whether this petition is filed in good faith or as part of a campaign to obtain custody through deception." She turned back to Margaret. "You mentioned the children are making progress. What evidence do you have beyond Dr. Whitmore's revised assessment?" "Video documentation, Your Honor. 6 days of recorded interactions showing voluntary responses, communication attempts, and recognition of caregivers, all time-stamped and verifiable." "I'd like to see it." Margaret pulled out a tablet, began playing clips. The courtroom watched in silence. Declan reaching for Nathaniel's hand, Rowan tracking faces across the room, both boys making sounds when spoken to. Not dramatic, not miraculous, but undeniably real. Judge Morrison watched every second, her expression softening fractionally. When the last clip ended, she removed her glasses, cleaned them, replaced them. "Miss Hartwell, I'm going to ask you a direct question and I expect a direct answer. Is this petition about the children's welfare or about the $50 million trust fund they inherited from your sister?" Constance's composure shattered. "How dare you? Answer the question. I love those boys. That's not what I asked." Constance's lawyer tried to intervene, but she waved him off. "Of course the money is a factor," she snapped. "Do you know what it's like watching your sister's children live in luxury while you struggle? My husband lost his job. We have our own children to support. Yes, the trust would help, but that doesn't mean I don't genuinely want what's best for Declan and Rowan." The admission hung in the air like smoke. Judge Morrison's face hardened. "I see. Thank you for your honesty." She turned to her clerk. "I'd like to see the children. Are they in the building?" "Yes, Your Honor. In an observation room with their current nurse." "Bring them to chambers. I want to assess their condition personally." 10 minutes later, they were all gathered in Judge Morrison's private chambers, less formal, more intimate. Nathaniel pushed the specialized stroller through the door. Declan and Rowan sat side by side, secured with soft, adaptive straps, heads supported by cushioned rests. The new nurse, Gwendolyn, had been let go but not prosecuted, followed with the medical bag. Judge Morrison approached slowly, knelt beside the stroller, bringing herself to the boy's eye level. "Hello," she said softly. Declan's eyes focused on her face, clear, aware. Rowan made a small sound, not distress, just acknowledgement. "You understand me, don't you?" the judge murmured. Declan blinked, once, deliberately. Judge Morrison's breath caught. She stood, turned to Meredith. "Approach, please." Meredith stood, legs unsteady, and walked forward. "You're the housekeeper who became a guardian." "Yes, Your Honor." "That's quite a leap." "It wasn't planned, Your Honor. It just happened." "Things like this don't just happen." Meredith met her eyes. "These boys needed someone to believe in them. I did. That's all. You have no medical training. No, Your Honor. No experience with disabled children. My younger brother had a similar condition. He died when I was 19, so I have personal experience but no professional credentials." Judge Morrison's expression shifted slightly. "I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you. What made you think you could help when specialists couldn't?" Meredith chose her words carefully. "I didn't think about whether I could or couldn't, Your Honor. I just saw two children who were being treated like they were already gone, and I refused to accept that. So you decided to intervene. I decided to be present. The judge was quiet for a moment. Then, show me, Your Honor. Show me how you connect with them, whatever it is you do. Meredith glanced at Nathaniel. He nodded. She knelt beside the stroller. The courtroom observers leaned forward, watching. Meredith began to sing, softly, the lullaby from Vivian's notebook. Sleep, my darlings, sleep so sound. Mama's love is all around. Declan's head turned toward her voice. Rowan's breathing deepened, synchronized. When the stars come out to play, I'll keep the darkness far away. Both boys were completely focused on her now, eyes bright, present. Meredith reached out, touching each of their hands gently. You're so strong, she whispered. Show them how strong you are. She released their safety straps, carefully, ready to catch them if they fell. Come on, sweetheart, you can do it. Declan pushed against the stroller's armrests, his arms trembling with effort. And then impossibly, he lifted himself. Not standing, his legs couldn't support him, but pushing up from sitting position, using his upper body strength engaging muscles that specialists had said would never work. He held it for 3 seconds before lowering back down. A collective gasp filled the chambers. Rowan followed, mimicking his brother, pushing up, holding, lowering. Meredith's eyes filled with tears. Good boys, such good brave boys. She secured them back in the stroller, kissed each forehead. When she looked up, Judge Morrison was standing. The judge's eyes were bright. She removed her glasses, wiped them, replaced them. That's enough, she said quietly. I've seen enough. They returned to the courtroom. Judge Morrison took her seat, arranged her papers. The silence was absolute. Finally, she looked up. I've practiced family law for 32 years. In that time, I've seen every possible configuration of family, every type of custody dispute, every imaginable motivation behind these battles. She looked at Constance. Miss Hartwell, I don't doubt that you love your nephews, but love alone doesn't justify this petition. What I've seen today is a woman who has compromised medical documentation, financially influenced healthcare providers, and filed for custody partly motivated by financial gain. Constance's face went white. The evidence of fraud is substantial and will be referred to the appropriate authorities, but that's not the question before me today. The judge turned to Nathaniel. Mr. Ashford, you were absent. You admit that yourself. For 2 years, you were so consumed by grief that you failed your sons. Nathaniel's jaw clenched, but he nodded. However, Judge Morrison continued, absence is not the same as unfitness, and I've seen clear evidence that you are not only present now but actively engaged in ways that are producing results. She looked at Meredith. As for you, Miss Sullivan, your rapid elevation from employee to guardian is unusual. Under other circumstances, I might view it with more skepticism, but I've just watched you connect with those children in ways that can't be faked. I've seen them respond. I've seen proof of their improvement. She paused. And I've seen something else, something that matters more than credentials or professional training. I've seen someone who refuses to give up, who sees possibility where others see only limitation, who loves those boys not because she has to, but because she chooses to. Meredith's throat closed. Here's my ruling, Judge Morrison said. The petition for emergency custody is denied. Full custody remains with Nathaniel Ashford. The guardianship arrangement with Meredith Sullivan is upheld and formalized by this court. Relief crashed through the room like a wave. However, the judge continued, her voice hardening. I'm ordering a full investigation into the allegations of medical fraud. Miss Hartwell, if it's determined that you knowingly falsified documentation or bribed a medical professional, you will face criminal charges. Do you understand? Yes, Your Honor. Constance's voice was barely audible. I'm also granting you supervised visitation rights, 2 hours per month, supervised by either Mr. Ashford or Miss Sullivan. These are your sister's children, and they should know their aunt. But your access will be limited until you can demonstrate that your interest is genuinely in their welfare and not in the trust fund. The gavel came down with finality. Court is adjourned. Outside the courthouse, Nathaniel turned to Meredith and pulled her into a fierce hug. "We did it," he breathed. She nodded against his shoulder, unable to speak. In the stroller between them, Declan made a sound. Not crying. Something else. They pulled apart, looking down. His mouth was moving, forming sounds. Both adults froze. Nathaniel dropped to his knees beside the stroller. "Declan." The boy tried again, his whole face scrunching with effort. "Dada." For the first time, his very first time saying that word. Nathaniel's face crumpled. "Oh my God. Oh my God." Tears streamed down his face as he cradled his son's small hand. Rowan, not to be outdone, vocalized too. "Mama," looking right at Meredith. She knelt beside Nathaniel, and together they held their boys, crying and laughing and feeling the weight of impossible victory. People walked past, but they didn't care. This moment was theirs, earned, real, perfect in its imperfection. "Thank you," Nathaniel whispered to Meredith, "for everything, for fighting, for believing, for staying." "Always," she said, "I'll always stay." The transformation was complete but ongoing. The mansion had changed. Toys scattered across previously pristine floors. Music played constantly from the nursery, not just lullabies, but everything from classical to jazz. Laughter echoed through rooms that had been silent for years. Declan and Rowan had made progress that continued to astound their medical team. They weren't walking. The specialists were clear that independent walking was unlikely. The nerve damage was too severe. But they were moving. Declan could sit up unassisted for several minutes, could reach for and grasp toys, could feed himself with adaptive utensils. Rowan could roll from back to stomach, could push himself into sitting position with help, could make deliberate sounds that were beginning to resemble words. Both boys recognized faces, responded to their names, communicated their needs through sounds and gestures. Most importantly, they were happy. Their laughter was the most beautiful sound Meredith had ever heard. Nathaniel had restructured his entire life. He worked from home 3 days a week, left the office at 3 o'clock on the days he went in, made it home for every meal, every bedtime, every moment. He had learned to change diapers, mix formula, read their cues, had become the father he should have been from the beginning. And Meredith had moved into the guest house on the property, close enough to help but separate enough to maintain some boundaries. Though those boundaries were becoming increasingly blurred, nothing had been said explicitly. But there were moments, glances that lasted too long, touches that lingered, a growing awareness that they were building something that went beyond caregiving. But they were careful. The boys came first, always. The investigation into Constance took 3 months. The evidence was overwhelming. Bank statements, emails, Gwendolyn's testimony. Other victims came forward, families whose children Constance had evaluated in her role as a child welfare attorney, where she'd shown similar patterns of manipulation. She was charged with conspiracy to commit fraud and obstruction of justice. The trial was brief. She pleaded guilty to avoid worse charges. The sentence was lenient, 3 years, probation, community service, restitution to Nathaniel for legal fees, but her career was destroyed. Her law firm terminated her immediately. Her social circle evaporated. Her husband filed for divorce. She had gambled everything and lost. But there was one mercy. The supervised visitation continued. Once a month, Constance came to the mansion, spent 2 hours with her nephews, read to them, sang to them, slowly rebuilt a relationship based on genuine care rather than financial motivation. It was awkward at first, painful, but gradually something shifted. Constance began to see the boys as children rather than assets, began to understand what Meredith had known from the beginning, that they were whole people just expressed differently. One evening, as she was leaving after a visit, she stopped beside Meredith. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For saving them, for being what I couldn't be." Her eyes filled. "I lost a baby. Did you know that? Meredith shook her head. I was pregnant when Vivian died, 4 months along. I miscarried 3 weeks after the funeral. From the stress, the grief. Constance's voice broke. Those boys should have had a cousin. My daughter should have grown up with them. And instead, the unfinished sentence hung between them. Meredith's anger toward this woman softened fractionally. I'm sorry. So am I. For all of it. For what I did, what I tried to do. Constance wiped her eyes. Vivian would be ashamed of me. She would be proud that you're here now, trying to do better. Constance managed a weak smile. You're kinder than I deserve. We all deserve second chances. After Constance left, Nathaniel found Meredith on the porch. You okay? He asked. Yeah, just thinking about how complicated people are, how pain makes us do terrible things, how grace is harder than judgment. Hina sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. She told you about the miscarriage. You knew. Vivian told me right before she died. She was devastated for Constance. They'd been fighting, but Vivian still loved her. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and amber. Can I ask you something? Nathaniel said finally. Of course. Are you happy here, I mean, with all of this? Meredith considered. I'm happier than I've been in 12 years. Since my brother died, since my mother got sick. This feels like purpose, like I'm where I'm supposed to be. Good, because I don't want you to leave, ever. She looked at him, really looked. There was something in his eyes, something beyond gratitude. Nathaniel, I'm not asking for anything, he said quickly. I know it's complicated. The boys, the guardianship, everything. I just need you to know that you're not just important to them. You're important to me. Meredith's heart hammered. You're important to me too. Good. He smiled, soft, real. Then we'll figure out the rest as we go. He stood, offered his hand. She took it. And together they went inside where two little boys were waiting for their bedtime story. December 23rd. The mansion was decorated for Christmas. Not with the cold perfection of hired decorators, but with the chaotic joy of a real family. Handmade ornaments, strings of popcorn, drawings taped to walls. And in the living room, the biggest tree Nathaniel could find covered in lights and memories. They were hosting a gathering, not formal, just friends, family. Dr. Whitmore came bearing gifts. Mrs. Pemberton, who had become like a grandmother to the boys, the new nurse and her husband, a few of Nathaniel's colleagues who had watched his transformation with quiet amazement, and Constance. She arrived with her two children, a boy of 7 and a girl of 5, both nervous but curious about the cousins they were finally getting to know. The boys, now 3.5, sat in their adaptive chairs at the table. They couldn't sit in regular chairs yet, couldn't feed themselves completely, but they were there, present, engaged. Declan could say 23 words now. His favorites were Mama, Dada, More, and No. Rowan had 19. He loved hi, bye, and please. They weren't conversing in sentences, but they were communicating, and they were happy. The meal was loud and chaotic and perfect. Halfway through dessert, Constance's daughter Lily approached the boys' chairs shyly. Can I show them my drawing? She asked Meredith. Of course, sweetheart. Lily held up a picture she'd made. 4 stick figures holding hands. This is my family, she said to Declan and Rowan. And your family too. Declan looked at the picture, then at Lily. Family, he said carefully, deliberately. The table went silent. It was a new word, one they'd never heard him say before. Lily beamed. Yes, family. Rowan tried it. Fam. Couldn't quite get it, but he smiled anyway. Meredith's eyes filled with tears. Nathaniel reached under the table and took her hand. Later, after the guests had gone and the boys were asleep, Nathaniel and Meredith sat by the fireplace. I have something for you, he said. Nathaniel, we agreed no gifts. It's not a gift, it's a question. He pulled out a small box. Meredith's heart stopped. I'm not asking you to marry me, he said quickly, seeing her panic. Not yet, But I want you to know that I'm thinking about it, that when you're ready, if you're ready, I'll be here. Because I love you, not just for what you've done for my sons, but for who you are. He opened the box. Inside was a simple gold band, engraved with a line from Vivian's journal, "Love finds a way." "This was Vivian's," he said. "Her mother's before that. She would want you to have it, not as an engagement ring, just as a promise that you're family, that you belong here." Meredith took the ring with shaking hands. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll keep showing up, keep fighting, keep believing. Always." She slipped the ring onto her right hand. A promise. Not yet a vow, but someday, maybe. They sat together in the firelight, two broken people who had somehow built something whole. Upstairs in the nursery, they had transformed together. Declan and Rowan slept peacefully, their breathing steady, their faces relaxed, safe, loved, home. And in that moment, everything was exactly as it should be. The garden was full of people again, not a formal gathering, just life being lived. Declan and Rowan, now 5 years old, sat in their custom wheelchairs near the swing set Nathaniel had installed. They would never walk independently. The specialists had been clear about that from the beginning, but they could sit, could use their arms, could communicate in words and gestures and fierce determination. Declan was reading, slowly with help, but reading. He loved stories about dragons and brave knights. Rowan was drawing. His hand control was limited, but he could grip adaptive markers. He drew families, always 4 stick figures. Meredith watched them from the porch, one hand resting on her swollen belly. 6 months pregnant. A girl. Unexpected. Miraculous in its own way. She and Nathaniel had married 8 months ago. Small ceremony. Just immediate family. Constance had been there. Sober. Genuinely happy. She visited regularly now. Had become a real aunt. Brought her own children to play with the boys. Rebuilt her relationship with her nephews based on love rather than calculation. "What are you thinking about?" Nathaniel asked, joining her on the porch. "Everything. How strange life is. How broken things can heal if you're patient enough." "You sound like a greeting card," she laughed. "A very pregnant greeting card." He wrapped his arms around her from behind, rested his hands over her on her belly. "She's going to have 2 amazing big brothers, who will probably terrify her boyfriend someday." "Absolutely." From the garden, Declan called out, "Mama, look!" The butterfly had landed on his wheelchair. "I see it, sweetheart. It's beautiful." The butterfly stayed for a moment, then flew away. Declan watched it go, smiling, and in that smile Meredith saw everything. All the pain that had brought them here, all the healing that had made them whole, all the impossible moments that had become simply life. "I love you," Nathaniel murmured. "I love you too." From the garden, Rowan's voice, "Dada, come play." Nathaniel kissed her temple. "Duty calls. Go. I'll be there in a minute." She watched him cross the lawn, watched him kneel beside his son, watched all 3 of them laugh at something Declan said. Her family. Not the one she'd imagined when she first drove up to this mansion 18 months ago, terrified and determined and following a promise made to a dying woman. But the one she'd been given. And it was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Meredith rested both hands on her belly, felt the baby kick. Strong. Healthy. "You're going to love your brothers," she whispered. "They're going to teach you that the word impossible is just a challenge waiting to be proven wrong." She closed her eyes, sent a silent thank you to the 2 women who had made this possible. To Vivian, who had seen the future and left breadcrumbs. To her mother, Kathleen, who had extracted a promise and trusted it would be kept. And to the universe or fate or God or whatever force had brought her to this exact place at this exact time to save 2 little boys who had saved her right back. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Tomorrow, they would celebrate the twins' 5th birthday. Tomorrow, there would be cake and presents and laughter. But tonight, in this perfect golden moment, there was just peace, just family, just home. And that was more than enough. Text appears on screen. Declan and Rowan Ashford are now 7 years old. They attend mainstream school with adaptive support and are thriving academically and socially. Constance Hartwell completed her probation and now works as a victim advocate. She maintains a close, loving relationship with her nephews. Meredith Sullivan Ashford continues to advocate for children with disabilities through the Vivian and Kathleen Foundation, which has helped over 800 families challenge impossible diagnoses. Dr. Marcus Whitmore published a groundbreaking paper on neuroplasticity in children with severe disabilities, citing Declan and Rowan's case as proof that belief matters as much as medicine. Nathaniel and Meredith welcomed daughter Vivian Kathleen Ashford in 2024. She is healthy, adored by her brothers, and already showing signs of their stubborn determination. Sometimes the greatest miracles aren't medical. They're simply the choice to show up, to believe, to love, and to never, ever give up.